Hello, welcome to the Mad Butter channel. My name's Chris. In this video, which is a companion to the one I've just published about underexposed images in Luminar 4, in this video I'm looking at rescuing underexposed or high contrast images in Luminar AI to highlight the differences and similarities between the two programs. Of course, with the announcement of Luminar Neo, it may be that that program will be better than both 4 and AI. We'll be using the same high contrast image of the New Zealand town of Waimate that I used in the Luminar 4 video. So here we are in the Edit tab of Luminar AI with the image open. The first technique is the simplest one, using what you might call the magic button, i.e. accent AI, as opposed to AI accent as it's known in Luminar 4. So here we are, we'll simply move this slider up to about 85. And we're done. Simple as that. The second technique is using the light tool. So we'll open that, we'll increase exposure to about 3/4 of a stop. Bring the shadows up to 60. Highlights to -83 or thereabouts. And a small amount of smart contrast to 23. And that's the second technique. The third technique involves using local masking, since we don't have a layer functionality. So we'll go to the local masking tool and add a texture. And then we'll select our texture and what we're going to do is add the original image as a texture. Bear in mind, if you're working on a raw file, textures only work with JPEGs, and so if you're going to use this technique on a raw file, you'd first have to save out the raw file as a JPEG to use as a texture. So we'll apply this. By placing texture, leave opacity at 50% and go into advanced setting and set the blend mode to screen. So you can see the effect that has. It brightens the foreground, but unfortunately it also brightens the sky. At this point in Luminar 4 I applied a Luminosity Mask and inverted it so that the effect only applied mainly to the foreground and didn't brighten the sky. But of course we can't do that in Luminar AI, so our only real choice is to try and mask out the effect using the paintbrush. So make sure the opacity is on 100, softness is not too much, and we'll make it a big brush to start with, and we'll start brushing it out of the sky. What's important here is not to have any halos around the edge of the sky, as you can see. So it is in fact preferable to go over the edges of the building slightly rather than have unsightly halos in the sky. Perhaps not that much, but you won't really notice. Obviously I'm doing it quickly. You'll take a bit longer if you're doing this for your own images. So it's now only applying to the buildings. There's a bit around the edges where maybe we want to paint it back. Maybe want to just go a bit near the sky, but there you are. You see I've gone slightly over the sky and you get these horrible halos. So we'll have to take that out, take that little bit out there. So now that we've got it basically off the sky, we then need to go into the advanced settings and take brightness up to 50 and put in a bit of negative contrast. And there we are. See, it's made quite a difference to the photo. So that's the third technique. It's a bit messy because we don't have luminosity masks, but hopefully Luminar Neo will solve this issue. The fourth and final technique is to use super contrast in the professional section. This is what was known as advanced contrast in Luminar 4. So we'll bring the highlights to plus 40 with balance to minus 22, mid-tone contrast to 53. These are all amounts I've found out by experimenting, and balance to plus 13. Shadows contrast all the way to 100 and balance of minus 50. Now, if you've watched the Luminar 4 video, at this point I applied a luminosity mask and inverted it so that the effect only applied to the dark bits and not to the sky. Of course, I can't do that in Luminar AI. I could try masking out the sky, but as you've seen in the previous technique, it's actually quite difficult to get an accurate mask. So I'll leave it here for this technique, but just bear in mind you could try and improve it by masking out some of the sky effect. So here we have the 4 images. This is the first one, Accent AI. This is the second one, Light Tool. This is the third one, using the Texture tool in place of layers. And this is the fourth one, using super contrast. Seems to me that whereas with advanced contrast you lost all the texture in the walls of the building, with super contrast you don't. So in that sense, Luminar AI seems to have done a bit better. So finally, let's compare the results for each technique with the two programs. This is Luminar 4 using AI Accent. And this is Luminar AI using Accent AI. It's not really any difference. This is Luminar 4 using the Light Tool technique. And this is Luminar AI, again very little difference. This is Luminar 4 using layers set to screen blending mode. And this is Luminar AI using texture set to screen blending mode. This one seems a little brighter in the foreground. And finally, this is Luminar 4 using advanced contrast. And if you look at the front of the building, both the yellow wall and the sort of whitish wall to the side, you'll see there's not much texture. But when you go to Luminar AI with the super contrast, all the texture comes back, although it's a little darker. So that's a comparison of each program using each of the 4 techniques. So I hope you found these 2 videos useful. There's not a great deal of difference between them, frankly, except for the layer functionality makes the screen blend mode technique much easier in Luminar 4 than Luminar AI, where you have to work around the lack of layers using the texture tool, and you have to paint in your mask instead of having a luminosity mask available. It appears Luminar Neo will solve these problems, and hopefully it'll be better than both programs at this sort of work. Anyway, I hope you found this useful and even enjoyable, and thanks for watching.